Seattle, Washington, March 28, 2025. The wind outside carried the chill of a late winter, refusing to leave. In the heart of an upscale neighborhood where everything looked perfectly curated, fresh paint, trimmed hedges, doorsteps with seasonal wreaths, stood a modern home that hid a rotting secret behind its clean, glass facade. Inside, Grant Whitmore moved with robotic precision. At exactly 8 p.m., as he had done every single evening for the last 10 years, he poured himself 2 fingers of Glenlivet into a heavy crystal glass. He didn't swirl it, didn't sniff it, just sat down in his leather chair before the fireplace, staring into the embers as if they might burn away the memories. His suit jacket was still on, tie loosened but never removed. He was always composed, at least on the surface. To everyone else, Grant was a success story, a self-made financial advisor, a generous donor to the local hospital, and a man who hosted tasteful fundraisers in his art-filled home. People respected Grant, trusted him, and no one suspected what he'd buried 10 years ago in a vacant lot just outside the city. He took a slow sip and exhaled through his nose. No ghost tonight, he told himself, but the silence in the house pressed down harder than usual. There were no echoes of laughter in the halls, no scent of perfume lingering in the air, no humming from the kitchen, not since Rachel. Grant never spoke her name aloud anymore, not even in private. He closed his eyes. It had been exactly 10 years to the day, March 28, 2015, when Rachel had stood in this very house, face pale, suitcase in hand, and said the words that shattered everything. Rachel Whitmore had always been the kind of woman people naturally trusted. Before she became the phantom memory haunting Grant's life, she was a dedicated elementary school teacher, known for staying after class to help struggling students, for baking muffins during exam season, and for leaving handwritten notes in the desks of kids having a hard week. Her kindness wasn't performative. It was instinctual. She met Grant at a charity gala hosted by the Seattle Children's Hospital. He was magnetic, poised, articulate, charming in the way successful men often were. Rachel wasn't looking for love that night, but Grant pursued her relentlessly. Flowers, notes, surprise visits outside her classroom with coffee in hand. He made her feel like she mattered, like she could be both adored and admired. Their courtship was fast, elegant, like a fairy tale painted in perfect brushstrokes. Within a year, they were married in a quiet garden ceremony. But the cracks came early, tiny at first. A disapproving glance when she wore flats instead of heels. A scoff when she said she wanted to keep teaching after marriage. Then the controlling habits, the gaslighting, the long silences and cold apologies. By the time Rachel found the strength to leave, the version of herself she once recognized had already started to vanish. I want a divorce. He remembered how his hands trembled, how quickly those trembling hands closed around her throat, how her eyes had widened, then dimmed, how he had wrapped her body in the living room rug, loaded her into the back of his Range Rover, and driven out past the city limits. He remembered the shovel, the frozen ground, the silence when it was done. They never found her. The case went cold after a year. Detective Marcus Doyle, who had once looked at Grant like a hero, had stared at him during the final interview with eyes full of suspicion, but no proof. And now here Grant was, a decade later, still breathing, still free. He looked down at the fire, now low and flickering. He lifted his glass again. To freedom, he muttered bitterly. And that's when the doorbell rang. The chime echoed through the house like a ripple through still water. Grant stiffened. He wasn't expecting anyone. He lived alone, and any visitors, on the rare occasions there were any, always called first. Friends, colleagues, clients, they knew better than to just show up. He glanced at the time on his Rolex. 8:07 p.m. Delivery? At this hour? Still holding his whiskey, Grant rose from the leather chair and made his way to the door. His footsteps felt heavier than usual. Something in his gut turned cold. Without thinking, without even checking the security cam feed or the peephole, he unlocked the door and pulled it open. And then the world tilted. There, standing on his front porch, bathed in the soft golden glow of the porch light, was Rachel. Her, the woman he had killed, the woman he had buried. She looked older, maybe There were fine lines around her green eyes. A few strands of silver threaded through her shoulder-length brown hair. But it was her, not someone who looked like her. Her. Same soft voice. Same small mole at the corner of her mouth. "Hi, Grant," she said with a gentle smile, as if nothing had happened, as if they had just spoken that morning. "Took you long enough to open up." For a moment, everything inside Grant stopped. Not just the logical part, the one that had spent the last decade crafting airtight lies, polishing every alibi, but something deeper. A stillness took root in his chest, somewhere between awe and horror. His mind screamed that it couldn't be her, that she was dead. He had killed her. And yet, the tremor in his hands wasn't just fear. It was something else, something far more dangerous. Hope. Because for 10 years, he had been haunted by Rachel's absence. Not just the act of her death, but the echo of it. The unfinished conversation. The suitcase still zipped. The way she said, "I want a divorce with finality and not fury." Grant had convinced himself he didn't miss her. That he'd buried more than a body. That the house felt cleaner, quieter, easier without her. But now, standing in front of him like no time had passed, she looked at him the way she used to, before the cracks, before the arguments, before everything crumbled. And for a terrifying flicker of time, part of him wanted this to be real. Maybe she had survived. Maybe she had escaped and hidden and now returned to forgive him, to start over. A twisted rebirth of the life they never had. The old Grant, the one who believed in redemption, whispered through clenched teeth, "Maybe this is your second chance." But that whisper was drowned by the truth. He had felt her die, heard her last breath, buried her with his own hands beneath a canopy of freezing stars. This wasn't resurrection. It was confrontation. Still, the ache behind his ribcage refused to settle. He watched her step past him, her movements so familiar it made his skin crawl. She was real, impossibly real, and yet utterly wrong. The ghost he'd always expected had come not with screams or chains, but with soft smiles and the same damn perfume she used to wear. That's what broke him. The glass fell from his fingers, not from shock, but from the unbearable weight of memory. The glass slipped from Grant's hand and shattered against the hardwood floor. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His body refused to move. She walked past him and stepped into the house, like she still lived there, like she had a right to be there. She hung her coat neatly on the same hook she used to use, glanced around the living room. "You changed the furniture," she said. "I like it, but I would have put the couch on the other wall." Grant leaned against the wall, hand gripping the frame for balance. This was a dream, a hallucination, a psychotic break. But the smell of her perfume, Dior, just like always, was real. Too real. He forced out a whisper, almost choking on the words. You're dead." Grant didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. He spent most of it sitting at the edge of his bed, staring down the hallway toward the guest room where Rachel, or whatever that thing was, had gone to sleep. Every creak of the old floorboards, every gust of wind outside, sent his nerves firing like a live wire. When he'd finally gathered the nerve to ask who she was, she had looked at him like he was the one losing touch with reality. "What are you talking about, Grant? I'm your wife. We had breakfast this morning. Don't you remember?" And the terrifying part? She said it with absolute conviction. She moved like Rachel. She spoke like Rachel. She even remembered where the mugs were in the kitchen cabinet, the ones Grant had reordered after the old set shattered. She knew where they kept the spare towels, where the light switch was in the hallway. Things no stranger should know. But Grant knew what he had done. He could still feel the weight of that night, the cold air on his skin as he lowered her body into the earth, 50 paces east of the lone pine in a lot no one went near anymore. She was dead, dead. And yet, that morning, there she was, in his kitchen, wearing a worn gray bathrobe she'd once refused to throw out. "You're not real," he told her, voice hoarse. Rachel, or whoever she was, paused from slicing strawberries and tilted her head. "You've been saying that since last night. Grant, if you're having some kind of breakdown, we need to call someone." She touched his face. Her hand was warm, firm, not cold like a ghost, not see-through like a hallucination. Real, too real. He snapped a photo with his phone the moment she turned away, fingers shaking. Later, when he checked his camera roll, his breath caught. The space where she stood was just a blur. A smudge, like someone had wiped her from the image. He blinked, closed the app, reopened it. Now she was there, clear as day, holding the plate of sliced fruit, smiling. What the hell was happening? Later, he set up a hidden camera in the study while pretending to reorganize files. He needed proof. Something concrete. Something to prove to himself he wasn't unraveling. That evening, as she sat across from him on the couch watching Roman Holiday, the same movie they'd argued over the week she disappeared, Grant studied her every gesture. The way she tucked her hair behind her right ear. The way she stirred her tea, clockwise, 2 spoons of sugar, never 3. It wasn't just imitation. It was mimicry down to the muscle memory. And that night, when she laid her head on his shoulder, just like she used to, he nearly screamed. After she fell asleep, Grant quietly stepped away, tiptoed to his office, and opened a private folder on his computer labeled Utilities. Inside were old photos, ones he hadn't looked at in years. Real pictures of Rachel, before she disappeared. He compared every detail. Eye shape, lip curve, the faint scar above her eyebrow from the skiing trip in Colorado. Identical, but that made it worse. If this wasn't her, then who the hell had studied her so perfectly? And if it was her, he poured another drink. His hands trembled. By sunrise, his suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his sanity hanging by a thread. She greeted him in the kitchen with a fresh pot of coffee and a gentle smile. "Rough night?" she asked. Grant didn't respond. He just stared. She crossed the kitchen and touched his hand. "You need to stop looking at me like I'm a ghost." He pulled his hand back. "You're not supposed to be here." She frowned, quiet for a moment, then said something that made his blood run cold. "The dead don't always stay buried, Grant." Grant had always believed in logic, in facts, in measurable reality. But nothing about this made sense. By the second morning, he had one goal: get proof. Hard proof that this woman wasn't who she claimed to be. Because if he couldn't prove that, then maybe he was the one slipping. He set up more cameras. One in the hallway, another in the kitchen, a small hidden one beneath the mantel above the fireplace, masked behind a dusty vase no one ever touched. That night, he pretended to go to bed early. Rachel, or whoever she was, seemed unfazed. "I'll be down in a minute," she called. "Just need to finish folding the laundry." The voice was cheerful, effortless, like they were a normal married couple again. Grant sat in the dark of his office, monitoring the feed, watching her move from room to room with absolute comfort. She folded sheets, checked the locks, wiped the kitchen counters, even paused at the fireplace and stared into the flames with a strange stillness. When he clicked to take a snapshot from the feed, her image froze in the frame, then distorted, then vanished. "What the?" He refreshed the footage, played it back. This time, there was just an empty room. The footage had erased her completely. No trace, like she was never there. He scrolled through the security stills. Every frame, she'd appeared and had been corrupted. Some were blurred beyond recognition. Others were just blank, voids where a person should be. He went back to the earlier photos he'd taken on his phone, ones from the day before. Now, she was missing from those too. Just gone. He pulled up the video he had secretly recorded of her preparing tea, another effort to gather proof. He clicked play. Nothing but static and white noise. Then the video froze on one frame, the kitchen empty. He stared, horrified. The timestamp was correct, but the subject had vanished. Am I losing my mind? Out of desperation, he opened his laptop, turned on the webcam, and looked directly into the lens. "Today is March 30th, 2025, he whispered. 3 days ago, a woman who looks exactly like my wife showed up at my doorstep. But that's impossible. Rachel is dead. I buried her. I'm recording this in case I'm not crazy. In case something happens to me." He saved the video, emailed it to himself, backed it up on a flash drive, then deleted the local copy. Paranoia crept in like smoke under a door. If someone was tampering with his media, they couldn't reach his email, right? Grant sat back in his chair, staring at the screen. And somewhere above him, in the attic he'd never opened since moving into the house, someone was watching. It was late afternoon the next day. The sky outside was heavy with dark, low clouds, the kind that pressed against the windows and dared you to breathe easy. Inside, Grant paced the living room like a trapped animal. He hadn't seen Rachel all day. One moment she was sitting on the patio reading a book. The next, gone. No goodbye. No note. Not a sound. He had torn through the house twice already, even searched the garage and basement. She had vanished. Again. He poured a drink, hands shaking, and muttered under his breath, "You're losing it, Whitmore. You're losing it." Then came a knock. 3 slow, deliberate pounds on the front door. He froze mid-step. That knock, it wasn't hers. It had weight. Authority. He approached cautiously, looked through the peephole, and his stomach turned. Detective Marcus Doyle. Same gray overcoat. Same hard eyes. Same grim, skeptical expression he'd worn 10 years ago when Rachel first disappeared. Grant opened the door, forced a smile. "Detective Doyle, this is unexpected." "Evening, Mr. Whitmore," Doyle said, tone flat. "Mind if I come in?" Grant hesitated for a beat. "What's this about?" "Just a routine check-in. Unsolved cases never really die, you know. They just sleep." Grant swallowed hard. "Of course. Sure. Come in." He stepped aside, letting Doyle enter. The detective scanned the room slowly, deliberately. "Still living alone?" Doyle asked, as he walked past the fireplace, hand behind his back. Grant's mouth dried. "Yes. Always have." The words came out too fast. Doyle paused near the staircase, tilted his head slightly. "Strange. I thought I saw a second toothbrush in the bathroom the last time I was here." Grant said nothing. "You sure there's no one staying here?" "I said I'm alone." Grant snapped a little too sharply. Doyle nodded, lips tight. Then he turned around, looked Grant square in the eye. "You do remember what day it is, don't you?" "What are you getting at?" 10 years since your wife vanished." Grant's chest tightened. "And? You closed that case a long time ago." Doyle stepped closer, voice low. "We never closed it. We just ran out of places to dig. But sometimes things surface. New witnesses. New tips. You think someone's come forward?" Doyle narrowed his eyes. "Funny thing is someone has. Said they saw a woman matching Rachel's description not too far from here. You know anything about that?" Before Grant could respond, Doyle's gaze shifted over his shoulder. "Expecting company?" he asked. Grant turned. The living room was empty. But he could swear, he'd just seen Rachel standing at the top of the stairs. She was gone. Again. He turned back, flustered. "It's probably the television. I left it on upstairs." Doyle raised an eyebrow. "Of course." He started walking toward the door, then paused. "Tell your guest I said hello. If she's who I think she is, I'd love to ask her a few questions." Grant's blood went cold. "There's no one here." Doyle nodded slowly. "Sure, Whitmore. Sure there isn't." Then he left, and the second the door clicked shut behind him, a voice floated from the top of the stairs. Was he gone? Grant looked up. There she was, Rachel, standing in the exact spot where he thought he'd seen her moments before, smiling softly. "What the hell is going on?" he whispered. And this time, she didn't answer. That night, Grant didn't sleep. He lay in bed, wide-eyed, listening to the soft rhythm of Rachel's breathing beside him. It was the same cadence he used to find comfort in years ago. But now it was maddening. It was wrong. Because she wasn't supposed to be here. Because she was dead. He slowly rolled onto his side and watched her in the darkness. The curve of her shoulder. The flutter of her lashes. Even the way she clutched the blanket near her chin, just like she always had. It was all too perfect. Was this a ghost? A dream? A punishment? Or something far worse? When the first rays of morning light sliced through the blinds, Grant slipped out of bed and crept to his office. He didn't bother turning on the lights. He went straight to the laptop. The video he'd recorded, the confession to himself, the one he'd backed up, he needed to see it again. He needed to know he wasn't insane. He opened the email he'd sent to himself. The attachment was there. He clicked play. Static. Garbled sound. Then nothing but a warped blur on screen, like it had been corrupted by time itself. He stared at it, lips parting slowly. No. He reached for the flash drive where he had saved a second copy. Plugged it in. Clicked the file. Same result. Gone. He backed away from the desk, chest heaving. If he couldn't trust his eyes or his recordings, what could he trust? That afternoon, Rachel returned from running errands, or so she claimed. She carried a small bouquet of white lilies and placed them on the kitchen island like it was any ordinary Wednesday. "You like lilies," she said, smiling. "They were your mother's favorite, weren't they?" Grant didn't answer. He just stared at her. Then quietly he asked, "Where did you go this morning?" She blinked. "What do you mean? When I woke up, you were gone." "I was at the cemetery," she said casually, turning away to put the flowers in water. Grant's throat tightened. "Cemetery? Just visiting old friends." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't press her. But his mind raced. Did she know? Had she found it? Had she gone to the lot? That night, after dinner, she suggested watching a movie. She chose Roman Holiday. Again. Grant's jaw clenched. That was the movie they were watching the night she asked for a divorce. The night he killed her. He waited for her to fall asleep before returning to the office. He opened the photo folder on his computer, the one he kept locked. He scrolled to pictures of Rachel, the real Rachel. He compared every feature: nose, jawline, earlobe, even the birthmark behind her left ear. A perfect match. But she couldn't be real. And if she wasn't Rachel, then who the hell was she? Desperate, Grant picked up his phone and opened the camera. He walked into the bedroom. Rachel was still asleep, hair falling across her cheek, lips slightly parted. He snapped a photo, went back to the office, opened the gallery. The photo was blank. Just the bed. No one in it. He tried again. Same result. The system was deleting her, erasing her, or someone was. He leaned forward and whispered into the darkness. "What do you want from me?" No answer came. But as he closed the screen and turned away, he felt a presence behind him, and a voice whispered from the shadows. "Justice." By the next morning, Grant couldn't take it anymore. Rachel's quiet humming as she made breakfast in the kitchen felt like knives behind his eyes. Her gentle touch on his shoulder made his stomach turn. Every moment she was near was like being haunted in broad daylight. She was too calm, too normal, too patient, and that's what terrified him most. "I'll be home late today," he muttered, grabbing his coat. She didn't look up from the skillet. "Important meeting?" Something like that. "All right," she said softly, like a wife sending her husband off to work. He drove an hour north, just outside Seattle, to the place where it had all ended 10 years ago. The vacant lot had changed. What used to be raw, frozen earth was now overgrown with tall grass, shrubs, and the wild encroachment of nature. But that tree, still stood. The old pine, with bark like wrinkled skin. He walked to it, glancing around to be sure no one had followed him. Then he counted. 1, 2, 3. His boots crunched through brush as he moved 50 paces east. He remembered the exact number, the exact slope of the ground, the way the moonlight had hit that spot as he finished digging 10 years ago. And there it was. Or rather, there it wasn't. No signs of disturbance. No shallow holes. No scattered rocks. No markers. The patch of earth looked pristine, undisturbed, as if no one had ever been buried there. Grant exhaled, dizzy with relief. "Okay," he muttered. "Okay, the body's still there. I'm not crazy." But then the relief turned to ice in his blood. If the body was still in the ground, still buried where he left it, then who the hell was living in his house? He stood in that clearing for a long time, staring at the dirt, the tree, the sky. The same wind that had once carried away his guilt was now rushing back with questions. The warmth he felt when she hugged him. The scent of her hair when she leaned in. The exact way she folded laundry. Stirred coffee. Smiled when she looked at him. It wasn't possible. He knew hallucinations couldn't leave fingerprints on glasses or slam doors when angry. They didn't cook for you or fold your socks the way only one person ever had. She was real. She was in his house. And she knew everything. Grant backed away from the grave slowly, his pulse thudding in his ears. He didn't hear birds. He didn't hear wind. All he heard was the echo of her voice from that morning. "Be careful today." He got back into the car with his hands shaking on the steering wheel. And as he pulled onto the road, one thought kept repeating in his head, louder than the tires on gravel. If that's not Rachel, what the hell is she? When Grant returned home that night, the house was dark. Too dark. No kitchen lights, no TV humming in the background, no soft footsteps on hardwood. Just an eerie, unnatural silence. He stepped inside slowly, closing the door behind him like it might shatter if he moved too fast. "Rachel," he called out. "Nothing." He flicked on the foyer light. The couch was empty. Her book still lay on the coffee table, open to the same page she'd been reading that morning. But she was nowhere in sight. "Rachel," he said again, louder this time. Then, from the shadows of the hallway, a soft voice emerged. "Been to the grave?" Grant nearly dropped his keys. She stood there, half-shadowed, arms folded, her voice calm but icy. "What are you talking about?" he asked, forcing his tone flat, neutral. She stepped forward, letting the hallway light catch her face. That same face he'd buried a decade ago. The lot behind a pine tree, 50 paces east. His breath hitched. "I don't know what you're implying." "Stop lying." Her voice wasn't loud, but it hit like a brick to the chest. "You strangled me. You wrapped me in a rug. You buried me. Do you remember what you whispered as you lowered me into the ground?" Grant backed into the wall, shaking his head. This isn't possible." She advanced one step closer. "Oh, Grant, come on. You don't actually believe I rose from the dead, do you?" He stared at her, lips trembling. "Then who are you?" And that's when she did something that made his knees weaken, something simple but terrifying. She ran her hand down her face, not literally removing a mask, but symbolically. Her posture changed. Her smile faded. Her eyes hardened. And just like that, Rachel was gone, and someone else stood in her place. "You really don't recognize me?" she asked. He blinked, stunned, confused. Then his voice cracked. "Kate." She smiled. Bingo. For a brief, shattering second, Grant wasn't looking at Rachel anymore, or even the woman pretending to be her. He was looking into the eyes of someone else, someone he hadn't thought about in years. A memory rose from the vaults of his past like a ghostly flare. Rachel and Kate, sitting cross-legged on the Whitmore porch, giggling over a bottle of cheap wine, their faces lit by the soft glow of string lights. He'd barely noticed Kate back then, just another name in Rachel's orbit. Quiet, loyal, always around. But now, those same eyes were staring at him with something far colder than curiosity. Grief, purpose, rage. Kate didn't speak for a moment. Her face changed, not physically but emotionally. The smile dropped. Her posture shifted. And in that moment, it was as if Kate stepped forward from inside the Rachel mask, no longer hiding. She blinked slowly and then, without being asked, whispered, "She saved me, you know." Grant said nothing. Kate's voice turned distant, almost soft. "We were 16, walking home after drama club. Just us in a dark alley behind the school gym. He came out of nowhere, knife in hand. I froze, completely shut down. But Rachel didn't. She screamed at me to run. She threw her backpack at him. She bought me time. A tear welled in Kate's eye but never fell. She stayed behind so I could live. He took her. And for 3 days, I didn't know if she was dead." She paused, jaw clenched tight. But she came back, broken, bloodied but alive. And you know what she told me from a hospital bed? Her voice cracked. She said, "As long as you're okay, it was worth it." Grant's stomach churned. "I owed her everything," Kate whispered. "And then you took her." She stepped closer, the air between them dense with history. "You didn't just kill her, Grant. You erased her. You left the world thinking she was just another woman who walked away. But I remember the girl who stayed behind so I could live. And I promised myself I would make sure she got justice, no matter the cost." His back hit the wall. Kate Clark, Rachel's childhood best friend. The girl who had vanished after the funeral. The one who never showed up again, never returned any messages. "Ow." 10 years, she said. 10 surgeries, behavioral mimicry, voice coaching, facial reconstruction, and years of studying her, watching every home video, reading her journals, absorbing every memory she ever shared with me. I didn't just impersonate her, Grant. I became her. Grant stared at her in disbelief, his mind scrambling. "Why?" he asked. Kate's jaw tightened. "Because Rachel saved my life." She stepped closer, her voice now thick with restrained rage. "When we were 16, we were attacked walking home from school. Some psycho dragged us into an alley. He pulled a knife. I froze, but Rachel didn't. She pushed me away, screamed at me to run. She stayed behind. Her voice cracked. He kept her for 3 days. You know what they found when they got to her? Grant shook his head slowly. She survived, Kate continued. Barely. 6 months in the hospital. Dozens of surgeries. Trauma that would have shattered anyone else. But she made it. She smiled through it. You know what she said kept her going? She looked him dead in the eye. The thought that I was safe. That I got away. Grant swallowed hard. She never told me that story. Of course not. She didn't want to be a victim to you. She wanted to be whole. Kate's eyes narrowed. And then she married you. And you started hitting her. That stopped him cold. She called me crying. I begged her to leave. But she said she still loved you. Even after everything. Until one day, she disappeared. And you told everyone she just left. Grant's knees buckled. He dropped into the armchair like a puppet with its strings cut. You knew, he whispered. I knew, but no one listened. So I spent 10 years preparing. Not to kill you, no. I wanted you to see her again. To feel the weight of your guilt. To wonder if you were going insane. She pulled out a small voice recorder from her pocket and hit play. If Rachel's body is still there, then who the hell is in my house? Grant heard his own voice, recorded earlier that day. He looked up at her, color draining from his face. I wanted you to confess, Grant, Kate said. Not just to me, but to yourself. And now, you're almost there. Grant couldn't breathe. His hands trembled as he stared at the voice recorder in Kate's hand. Her face, the same face he'd once kissed goodnight, whispered lies to, buried beneath 6 feet of frozen soil, now radiated something colder than revenge. Purpose. You don't get it, Kate said, voice eerily calm. This wasn't some theatrical stunt. This wasn't about scaring you. This was about breaking through that wall of yours, brick by brick, until you had no choice but to face what you did. She took a slow step forward. I watched you for months before I ever came back. Studied your routines. Watched you pour that same glass of whiskey every night at 8 p.m. like a priest at an altar. I moved into your life one drawer at a time. Grant blinked, his voice a hoarse whisper. What do you mean, moved in? Kate gave a half smile. Your attic, Grant. There's a small crawl space behind the insulation. Old houses like this always have secrets. I found mine. He stared at her, horrified. You've been living in my house? For almost a month before I ever rang the doorbell. Grant slumped further in his chair. It was like the walls were closing in on him. The corrupted photos, the disappearing video files, that was you. I studied digital forensics for this, she said proudly. Learned how to alter metadata, how to manipulate saved files, even how to mask my presence from security feeds. That one hidden camera behind the fireplace? I disabled it the second night. You hacked my systems? Kate's expression sharpened. Grant, I hacked you. That was the easy part. Getting you to question your own sanity? That was the real work. She walked over to the mantel, gently picked up a framed photo, one of the last of Grant and Rachel before her death. Her thumb brushed over the glass. I didn't want to just punish you. I wanted you to feel her again. Smell her. Touch her. Doubt yourself until the only truth you had left was guilt. Grant buried his face in his hands. You have no idea what I've been going through. Kate's eyes narrowed. You think you're the victim? She moved across the room, her tone now sharpened to a knife's edge. I spent 10 years rebuilding myself from the outside in. 10 surgeries, hundreds of hours of physical therapy, facial retraining, voice work. I memorized her posture, her habits, her memories. I didn't pretend to be Rachel. I became her. She reached in her pocket and pulled out a flash drive. Every conversation we've had, every confession, every moment of fear, I recorded it. I saved it. I backed it up 6 different ways. And I sent one to someone who still cares about the truth. The front door opened. Detective Marcus Doyle stepped inside. Good evening, Mr. Whitmore, he said, with the same deep disdain he'd worn 10 years ago. Hope we're not interrupting. Grant's heart stopped. You two, he whispered. You've been working together? Doyle nodded. Kate came to me a month ago, told me what she planned to do. At first, I thought she was insane. Then I listened and watched, and I realized she was my best chance at finally getting a confession out of you. Grant stood up, staggering back. This is entrapment. This is illegal. It's not a courtroom yet, Grant, Kate said coolly. Right now, it's just the truth, and you've been speaking it all week. Doyle stepped forward and looked Grant in the eye. You could deny it. But we have your voice, your face, your panic, your guilt. Grant collapsed back into the chair, his face pale and drenched in sweat. What happens now? He whispered. Kate stepped closer. Now, she said. Now you say it. Not in whispers. Not in panicked mutterings to yourself. You say it loud. You say what you did to her. And maybe, just maybe, you'll get to keep your soul. The room was silent. Thick, suffocating silence, broken only by the steady tick of the wall clock behind Grant's head. The same clock that had hung there for a decade, indifferent to the secrets it had ticked past. Grant sat hunched over, elbows on his knees, face buried in his trembling hands. His breath came in short, ragged bursts. His once pristine shirt was soaked in sweat. The polished man of influence, charm, and poise was gone. All that was left was the murderer underneath. Kate stood in front of him, her expression unreadable. Detective Doyle flanked her, arms crossed, his badge glinting under the ceiling light. Say it, Grant, Kate said softly. You've carried this for 10 years. Isn't it heavy? He didn't respond. You owe her that much, she added. After everything she gave you. After everything you took. Grant lifted his head slowly, his eyes bloodshot, hollow. For a long moment, he stared at Kate. Not as Rachel, not as a ghost, but as something beyond either. A reckoning. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Then finally, I killed her, he whispered. Doyle stepped forward. Louder. Grant's eyes flicked to the recorder Kate had placed on the coffee table. Its red light blinked patiently. I killed Rachel, he said louder. We were arguing. She said she was leaving me. She packed a bag. His voice cracked. She told me she was filing for divorce. That she'd met with an attorney. Said she was done. He clenched his jaw, struggling to finish. I snapped. I grabbed her. I thought I could stop her. Make her listen. But she fought. I lost control. He looked down at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. I choked her. I felt her stop moving. I wrapped her in the rug. Drove out to that lot behind the old pine. I counted 50 paces. I dug until I couldn't feel my fingers. And then I left her there. Tears welled up in his eyes, but didn't fall. And I told everyone she just left. That she'd probably found someone else. He looked at Kate again. But I knew. Every time I smiled. Every time someone told me I was a good man. I knew. Kate's hands were clenched tightly at her sides. Her jaw trembled, but she didn't move. She just stared at him, listening to the words she had waited a decade to hear. Detective Doyle nodded slowly, pulled out a pair of handcuffs, and stepped forward. Grant Whitmore, you're under arrest for the murder of Rachel Whitmore. You have the right to remain silent. But Grant didn't hear the rest. He wasn't listening. He was staring at Kate, who had lowered her eyes to the floor, her breath shaking in her chest. Was it worth it? He asked her. She looked up. The surgeries, the years, becoming her. Was it worth it? A long pause passed between them. Kate didn't smile, didn't cry. She just looked at him with eyes that no longer held fire, but something deeper. I don't know, she said honestly, but I know she deserved the truth. And now she has it. As Doyle led Grant out the front door in handcuffs, Kate stood alone in the center of the room. The house was quiet again, but this time it was a silence earned. The following morning, Seattle woke up to rain, gentle, steady, like the sky was exhaling after a long-held breath. For the first time in years, the house on Maplewood Drive stood still. No secrets pulsed through its walls. No guilt drifted between its rooms. Only Kate remained. She stood in front of the living room mirror, wrapped in a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. But the reflection staring back at her wasn't quite hers. It hadn't been for a long time. Gone was the woman named Kate Clark. The girl who once laughed with Rachel in dorm rooms. The friend who survived a back alley horror and swore she'd never feel powerless again. That person had been buried the moment Rachel was taken. What rose in her place was someone else entirely. Someone made of scars and purpose. Rachel's face, reconstructed, studied, replicated, now looked back at her from the glass. I became you, she whispered to the reflection. I became you to bring you peace. But what cost? She reached up slowly and unclasped the locket around her neck. Inside, a photo of two young girls, Rachel and Kate, smiling on a sunlit porch. Innocent, unbroken, real. She stared at it for a long time, then gently placed it on the mantel. She didn't cry. There were no more tears left. Later that day, she walked into the Seattle Police Department. Detective Doyle was waiting, his tie loosened, eyes weary but respectful. They sat across from each other in silence for a moment. Then he asked quietly, "So what now?" Kate looked out the rain-blurred window, then back at him. "Now, Rachel Whitmore comes home." Doyle raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" "She was never declared dead. Only missing." Her voice was firm. "Steady." "And Kate Clark?" "She vanished on a rainy highway 10 years ago. Body never found." Doyle sat back in his chair, studying her. Then, finally he nodded. No protest, no judgment, just the acceptance that some kinds of justice don't follow court procedure. As she signed the form restoring Rachel's legal identity, her hands didn't shake. Not even once. Because the war was over. Rachel had been avenged. And now, the ghost had decided to live. Weeks passed. The headlines came and went. Seattle financier confesses to wife's murder after 10 years. But most people forgot, as they always do. Another scandal. Another man in cuffs. Another tragedy buried beneath newer ones. But for Rachel Whitmore, now walking freely in the body that had once belonged to her best friend's memory, life was no longer about vengeance. It was about figuring out what came next. The days were quiet. Too quiet sometimes. She had no family here, no friends left who knew her as either Rachel or Kate. Her world had become a shell she'd crawled out of and left behind. Justice had been served. But purpose? That was a harder thing to reclaim. She spent her mornings walking the lake trail near Green River, coffee in hand, staring at her reflection in the water. The woman who looked back at her no longer felt like a mask. She was Rachel now, not because she said so, but because she'd earned the right to carry that name. Sometimes she wondered, had she gone too far? Had the years of obsession warped her into something Rachel wouldn't even recognize? But then she'd hear Rachel's laugh in the back of her mind. See her smile. Remember the bloodied girl who once told her in a hospital bed, "As long as you're okay, it was worth it." Rachel had never been selfish, never cruel, even after everything. And neither was she. Now, Rachel devoted her time to helping women escape abusive homes. She partnered with a legal aid group, quietly, anonymously, offering shelter, paperwork, second chances. Every time she saw a frightened woman walk through those doors, she saw Rachel. And maybe that was enough. One afternoon, Detective Marcus Doyle stopped by the community center. He waited in the lobby, holding a sealed envelope. When she appeared, he gave a nod. "Thought you'd want this." She opened it at her desk. Inside, a photo of Rachel and Kate, the original print from the locket. Doyle had recovered it from Grant's home during the search. "Didn't think you'd want it lost in some evidence bin." She looked up at him. "Thank you." He started to leave, but paused at the door. "You did what the law couldn't," he said. "But that doesn't mean it didn't cost you." She nodded slowly. "I know, and you're okay with that." She stared down at the photo. A soft smile ghosted across her lips. "I have to be." That night, the rain stopped. Seattle skies cleared just enough to let the stars breathe through the mist. The house on Maplewood Drive stood still, its windows dark, its secrets drained like old poison. Rachel, no longer Kate, stepped out onto the back porch with a blanket around her shoulders and a steaming mug in her hand. The air smelled like wet pine and renewal. In the quiet, she listened to the wind brushing through the trees, like the world was exhaling something it had held too long. Beside her, on the small patio table, sat a ceramic pot, a gift from Rachel's former classroom 10 years ago. She had forgotten about it until the day after Grant's arrest, when she found it tucked away in the attic crawl space, still intact. Inside, a single dormant white orchid. It had never bloomed, not even once, not in all those years. Rachel had once joked that it was waiting for the right season, or maybe just the right version of me. Now, under the pale glow of the porch light, a single bud had cracked open, pure white, unapologetic, alive. Rachel leaned in, inhaled gently, then whispered. "You waited." She didn't know who she was speaking to, the flower, her friend, the part of herself she had buried long ago. But it didn't matter, because something was blooming again, and this time, it didn't need to be hidden in the dark.